All right, y'all. This is it. Let's get into it. This is my story of what it was like growing up without my father around. Now, when I was born, I was an oops baby, born out of wedlock. That was not planned. It was no intention. My parents were 19, 20, maybe. Yeah, somewhere around there, definitely. And when I was born, first of all, my mother didn't know that she was pregnant with me for 7 months. So that means that she was drinking and partying and smoked cigarettes and doing all that other stuff that she had done normally as a reckless teenager with a baby in her belly. And somehow, I've got all 10 fingers and toes. Unbelievable. Miracle to start from the very beginning. But when I was born, it was out of wedlock, all right? And there was some uncertainty around who my father was. There was a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion. My mom was bouncing around from a few different men and trying to have me call them dad. To no avail, because if I can be straight up honest with you, I knew from the very beginning that they were not my dad. I have recollection of 2 different men, and I knew that neither of them were it. I just saw them as my mom's friends. They didn't register any strong connection to me. They certainly didn't go out of their way to make a connection. Although one of them's grandparents definitely did fall in love with me and took good care of me and built a relationship with me for a little bit, but the relationship fizzled. And so as you can see from the very beginning, I had multiple men coming in and out of the picture until I was 3 years old, when my other grandparents, my father's grandparents, found out about me. Now, before that, I had gone home with my grandparents on my mom's side, and we were living in that house as my mom had other boyfriends. And I was very blessed at the start of it all to have my grandfather. My grandfather was an incredible man. After raising 4 kids of his own, he still had more than enough love in his heart to be my best friend, my whole world, and my everything. That was the first imprint I ever had of a man in my life. And it was good. It was really good. He and I were the best of friends. I'll never forget him. But when I was 3 years old was when my dad and his family found out about me. And, you know, it brought a court case that followed for partial custody. But something that you need to understand about my parents is that they both struggled with substance. My mother struggled with alcohol, and my father struggled with drugs. Both pretty heavily. So from the beginning, it was a little bit of a shit show. Let's be honest. It was a little bit of a shit show. But my dad had managed to stay clean for enough amount of time that my other grandma, his mom, wanted to start a court case for partial custody, because who wouldn't want a child in their life? That's a new grandchild for them. That's a son for my dad. That's an incredible, it's got to be a crazy feeling to find out all of a sudden that this is your child and this boy is supposed to be part of your family. And so my grandmother on my dad's side sued for partial custody. Well, in the middle of the case, while we were hanging out, we'd get to see each other pretty regularly. My dad was around then. He was living in town. But during the middle of the case, my father relapsed. And when he relapsed, my grandma just dropped the case because she knew that this was going to be a battle for my dad moving forward. And that was no kind of life for a young boy. No kind of life for anybody, really. Let's be real. But out of that chaos, my grandmothers, who ended up raising me, came to an agreement. My grandma, on my mom's side, let's just call her Judy. Grandma Judy, the one and only. Grandma Judy was amicable to give visitation rights to my other grandmother. And it started slowly, it started small. You have to build trust. You have to build a relationship. You can imagine there were feelings of animosity at first, right? Well, we want this boy in our family, or we want this boy, or, kind of any kind of court case is going to cause friction like that. But they were able to come to a beautiful understanding and an agreement that my other grandmother, on my dad's side, Grandma Linda, would get me every other weekend. And when I was there on the weekends, I would get a chance to spend time with my dad. And it was directly because of the relationship that these women were willing to build with each other that I was able to have my dad in my life at all. Really. I mean, let's just be honest with it. Because they were willing to come to the table. For me, the bigger purpose here, I was able to have my dad in my life. And their relationship grew over time. Trust formed more and more. And I was able to see that side of the family more and more until it built up to every other weekend. And it was nice because when I was there, when I was with my other Grandma Linda, when my dad was in town or out of jail or whatever it was, I would get a chance to see him in a safe, neutral environment where she was in control. It couldn't get too chaotic. And if it did, somebody could be there to intervene and make sure that things really didn't get out of hand, which, knowing now that my dad was using at the time is a blessing I'll be endlessly grateful for the rest of my life. Because God knows what kind of impact that could have had on me, right? So, because of that, we were able to start to form a bond. Now, remember, I didn't know that he was my dad for the first 3 years of my life. And this is all kind of foggy and a little bit blurry, so I reached out to my Grandma Linda and asked her these questions, asked her about these gaps in my memory, because I genuinely want to know. I'm curious to know. I have to know all of the pieces of myself in order to authentically share it with y'all. And that's the most important part to me about all of this. So, when I found out that when my mother was pregnant, she had already been separated from my father. And so from the very beginning, when she was pregnant, he had absolutely no idea. So again, 3 years, boom, you have a son. Whoa! Can you imagine the kind of chaos that brings into somebody's life? Realizing that they have a son. Can you imagine the mental shift you would have to make to realize that you have a child who's already on his way to growing, and he's your child. And it's like, I'd imagine everything else you have going on in your life stops like that. Has to. So we started to form a bond. We started to have a connection. And I would see him every other weekend, and he would take me to wrestling shows, and I would have friends in, my other life, as I called it. Every other weekend I went into my other life. And I had friends over there and family over there that I only got to really see when I was living my other life. So split between two worlds. Can you imagine? That's chaos for a young man. I was so confused all the time. I mean, it seemed normal enough to me, right? But I was always left wondering, why is my life like this? And most of my friends had their mom and dad in their house and had a normal, as I thought to my head, relationship at the time. The plutonic American family, the mom and dad and 2 kids and a dog. And I was living with my grandmas. And I did have my grandfather until I was 7 when he passed away. And when he passed away at 7 years old, I had been cultivating a relationship with my father. But you need to understand that he was in and out of jail for most of my life. So once I lost my grandfather, that was kind of it for men, at least consistently. I didn't live with another man. My grandmother never got remarried. And with my relationship with my father, he was dealing with a lot of demons of his own. He and my mother had a very, very, very tumultuous relationship. Super chaotic, super explosive, super unhealthy. And, I had inherited that. And as I was growing up, those were different things that I was dealing with within myself. These feelings of anger and confusion and sadness. And why can't I have a family like everybody else? Heartbreaking to a young man. I was in therapy from a very, very young age. They knew, like, again, bless my grandmothers, man. They knew that I was going to need help. I was going to need serious help. And they were exactly right. Because, yes, I would see my dad every other weekend at the beginning phases of my life from my early childhood. But when my dad was struggling with drugs, there are other problems that come with that. He's very short-tempered or quick to anger. He was checked out a lot. I would remember there would be times I would be playing video games in the living room, and I would look behind me and my dad's asleep, passed out on the couch. And so even the time that I did spend with him at times wasn't quality time bonding time. I was kind of there, and he was there, and in my mind at the time that felt normal, no matter how abnormal it turned out to be. And he would come to my sporting events and scouting events, and my grandmothers threw me into everything: music and sports and arts and scouting and church and church choir and all of these things. There was not a day of my life during the week that I did not have something going on, because they wanted to create that structure, right? They wanted to give me as much opportunity to be around other males, other men, as could possibly be, whether it was my scoutmasters or my soccer coach or the pastor or, just anybody in general who, if I needed guidance, I needed wisdom, I needed questions answered, I could have a male figure there to turn to, which was helpful, but it wasn't my father. And that was what I so desperately needed, was just to have my dad there, to answer simple questions, to help me make sense of my life, to make sense of the world around me and the world that I was living and who and what I was growing into. That was what I sought the most throughout my life. It started in my early childhood, and that was a theme that continued on into my 20s, early 30s. Wild, but that's trauma. That's real trauma for you. So as I grow older, getting to be around middle school age, my dad lives in Minneapolis, about 4 hours away from me. And, my parents had me when they were kids. Man. So they still didn't even know who they were or what they wanted to do or how they fit in the world or what it was going to look like for them, let alone having parenthood thrust upon them, right? And so he was out finding himself. He was out trying to figure it out. And, he kept getting lost and making wrong turns and making bad decisions. And it was over and over that he would be in and out of jail throughout my life. I remember one specific instance. He was coming to my house to bring me back my Harry Potter books at the time. Loved reading those books. It was a way that I got to connect with my grandmother. And he brought my Harry Potter books back to me. He was bringing them back. And I remember the cops pulled him over right outside of my house, right in front of my school. And they pulled him out of the car, and he had warrants out for his arrest for drugs or for, I don't know what it was. I was too young to know the details of the situation. But I remember they slammed his head down on the hood of the car and put him in handcuffs and threw him in the back of the car. And I was watching this from the window, stunned, devastated, scared. No one had any idea what was going on. More lost in confusion, and, people in my life, my grandmother's trying to explain it, but all I wanted was my dad. I wanted my dad. And that moment brought trauma. Here I am all these years later, and I can see it in my mind clear as day, right? Very, very traumatic for a young man at that age. And he would be in and out of jail for the next few years. And it wasn't until I got older, in high school, that we started to develop a relationship. You see, when I was younger, I was afraid of my dad. I was afraid to be around him. I knew how explosively angry he could get, how he could fly off the handle over something that I thought was so small and unimportant at any moment. And I just remember being a kid and not wanting to make my dad angry. Whatever that looked like. Like, don't care what I have to do or what it means for me or how I have to shut up or how I have to get small or how I have to make myself disappear so that you don't get angry at me. Because it was the worst feeling in the whole world. It was like being in a room that was on fire with a dragon who set the room on fire, and like just trying to shrink as small as I could so that he wouldn't burn me. And as I got older, I got more mature, and so did my dad. And when I was in high school was when he moved to Nashville. He did some awesome things in his life, really. When I was in high school, he was a sound and audio engineer, and he got a job working for Kenny Chesney to be his lead audio engineer, and went on tour with him and toured all over the United States, all over the U.S. for 6-7 years. When Kenny was the number one entertainer in the world, my dad got to the top of the mountain. Very, very, very tip top. And he would come and see me more often. He was doing better. He was making better choices. He'd kind of found himself, right? And that was when we finally really started to connect. It wasn't until I was 17. And when I turned 18, he came up and saw me. And we were road tripping. We used to go skiing. He loved to ski. And so he would come up once a year and we would go skiing. And it was in these road trips, it was in these moments that it was just him and I on the open road, in the car, listening to music, that he opened up to me. And he said, you're old enough to know now about my problems and the things that I struggle with and where I've been. And he came clean with me about his drug problem. For the longest time, everybody thought it was pot. Oh yeah, he just got a problem smoking pot. I'm from the Midwest where weed is a gateway drug and all, and it's legal now in half the states in America. So, there's some fear-mongering there that went on with that, but for the longest time, my family thought it was just weed. Well, he told me that it was much more serious than that, and he shared stories with me that even as an 18-year-old kid, I was like, dude, what? You did what? You needles? This, that? I'm sorry. Huh? No way. But we started to form a bond. We started to connect because, for the first time in my life, and, as a kid at 18, I didn't care that it had taken 18 years to get there. He was my dad, and I loved him. And I told him that all the time. I love you. I don't care about what you did in the past. You're here now. We're building a relationship now. And he told me about the times he'd traveled the world and all of the mistakes he'd made and, the regrets he had about his relationship with my mom and the regrets he had about his relationship with me. And he really opened his heart up to me, poured out his heart to me. And we really finally connected. It took 18 years. 18 years for me to get that connection with my father that I'd been waiting for my entire life. And it was the best thing. It was the best thing. Because I finally felt like we connected. I finally felt like we had a relationship. Like we understood each other, you know. And I was able to let all of that other stuff fall away. All of the drugs and the anger and the trauma and the violence and whatever. Because I understood that he wasn't perfect. But I just wanted my dad. I didn't care. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted my dad. And, you know, there were a few poignant moments. I remember his anger was always a big theme. And he would confess to me about his anger. You know, he would have moments where he would blow up, but I was older. And so, you know, I will never forget the first time I talked back to my dad. I was like, you're not going to talk to me like that. Never forget, I was late. I was late driving over to see him. And we were going to leave for a skiing trip. And, you know, I was dicking around. And I was whipping my car around in the snow because it was icy and trying to drift and be a badass. And I got stuck in a snowbank. And I was like 30 minutes late for when he wanted to leave to leave on our trip because I was dicking around. And he got mad at me and he yelled at me. And I was like, yeah, it was an accident. Just chill out. You don't have to get so angry. And he came roaring out of the room at me. What'd you say to me, young man? What did you say to me? No, you're not going to talk to me like that. No, you're not going to talk to me like that. And I felt that fire. And I was able to, withstand it. But dude, all of that fear and that trauma racing back. And so when we went on that trip, I'd had a cell phone for the first time. And I spent that whole trip in my cell phone, texting anybody who I could. This was before smartphones, so I'm trying to download some stupid game from the App Store to distract me, or I would just keep opening it just to anything, any distraction, get me out of here, anything. And he blew up about that too. He was like, I travel all this time, I give up all this time and effort and money to come see you, and all you want to do is sit on your damn phone and yada, yada, yada. And he's like, we don't get to see each other as much as it is. And I remember in that moment feeling the pangs of yeah, but it could be that way. If you choose it. Hurtful to both of us. But reality. Because you see, I had grown in my time apart with him. And I realized that, yes, I care about you and you're doing your own thing. But I need you. I need you. I remember having that conversation with him and being like, do you know that I need you? And I need you here. I need you here with me. And I get that you're out doing your own thing and you're on the road and all of that. I said, but what about me? What about what I need? You being here, this relationship. Because I had my other grandfather, but I didn't have consistent men in my life. People I could look up to, people I could turn to for answers, people I could go to for whatever. Because even though he had shared stuff with me, I still didn't feel safe and comfortable to share other things with him. I didn't know. And shortly after that, after he'd been traveling for years, being successful, because he worked more than just Kenny Chesney. He worked with Anthrax and Trace Adkins and, Everson Drive, a few big name bands in the industry, in the music industry. He'd had some success, and he'd told me when I was older that I wanted to do these things because I wanted to show you what was possible for yourself. Because I wanted you to look up to me and see that I could do something with my life, even though I struggled with drugs, even though I struggled with addiction and I had these problems. I wanted you to see that no matter what, You can always do whatever you want if you're willing to try. Make that jump, make that leap for yourself. And right around that time, he was living in the South while he was working for Kenny. And he got kicked off the crew. They were going to go to Canada, and he had some arrest warrants in Canada. He couldn't cross the border. Lost the job. Fell back into bad habits. And ended up in prison in the South. And you know anything about the American prison system, especially in the South, once you're in prison, they want to keep you in prison. And no amount of good behavior, no amount of anything could get him out. It seemed like every time he would get close, something else would happen and he would be back in, or he wouldn't pass his hearing, or whatever it was. I was getting to see him less and less and less. And in my early 20s, I remember him saying to me on a phone call that we had from prison, which became the normal way for me to connect with him. He said, "You know, dude, you are one of 3 people in the entire world that I can call right now. One of the 3 people in the entire world who I know if I call, they'll answer the phone. The other one is my mom, and the other one is my one good friend." And y'all, I can't explain what that did to me. The amount of hurt and sadness I felt for him, but the amount of hurt and sadness I felt for myself, because that was around the time that I was putting some of my allowance money into his food bank account so that he could eat at the commissary in prison. He called me one day as a 23-year-old kid and said, "Hey, dude, can you put some food in my food bank account so that I can eat?" And I'll never forget that as long as I live. I will never forget that, because I was a young, irresponsible kid, and guess what? I missed it that day, and I forgot, and I dicked off, and I went and did something else. And he called me again and was like, "Hey, did you put that money in? I haven't gotten a chance to eat today." And being responsible for your dad getting to eat food when you're 23 years old because you made a different choice and you wanted to go hang out with your friends, that was the kind of stuff that I was facing as a young man. That responsibility. See, I had to grow up really, really, really fast and have a choice. That's what not having a man around forced me to do, and it came with its positives and its negatives. I struggled heavily in my relationships with my grandmothers, especially in my relationships with women. I was always seeking validation outside of myself. It didn't matter what it was. Every time I did something, everywhere I turned, every time I made a decision, got a good grade, did good in sports, got an award at Boy Scouts, I was just turning and waiting for someone to look at me and tell me that they were proud of me, and tell me they love me, and give me a hug. I was looking for that from my dad. All of these questions I have. I didn't learn how to shave my face until I was in college. I had no idea. Basic life skills, things that I so desperately wanted the knowledge for. I didn't have anybody around to teach me. And it stunted my growth emotionally. Even though I had to grow up, I was short-tempered, I was irritable, I thought the world was always out to get me. Well, why me? I developed this victim mentality. Well, your family's normal, everybody's together, why me? Why are things so bad for me? I fell into that victimhood. I was just an angry young man. I was such an angry young man because I didn't have somebody in my life to be like, hey, I didn't have a man in my life to be like, hey, it's okay. You're all right. You win some, you lose some. It's all right. Tomorrow's a new day. Or, hey, great job. I'm proud of you. Proud of you, son. Proud of you, kid. Good job. Keep up the good work. Now, don't get me wrong, y'all. My dad was there. He would call me whenever he could. He would come to my sporting events, come to my plays, come to my scouting honors, come to all of that stuff when he was present and not, in jail or living somewhere else. But what stunted me was not having him here every day for the little things that I needed. The little moments of guidance, the pat on the back, or the, hey, what do you, let's talk about what's going on with you right now. You seem pretty angry. You seem pretty sad. Your grades are struggling, right? What happened with that girl? The little things that are the most important thing in a child's life is presence from their father. And not having him here caused me so much anguish and so many years of stress and doubts. The self-doubt that I lived through, the self-doubt that was constant, was like my normal way of being. Because I didn't have that subtle, nudge you on. Didn't have that someone was like, nah, man, you're good. You're doing it. I'm proud of you. A high five, a hug, a fist bump. Going out to throw the baseball with me. I know it sounds cliche. It doesn't matter because it was what I needed. To throw the baseball with me, to teach me. I was a terrible athlete. I played every sport there was, and I was terrible. Up until my senior year, when I met one of my close friends who was a great athlete and took the time to train with me and teach me things and take me under his wing. All of those things that I wanted, they all came later. Now, there are blessings because I was raised by beautiful, strong, powerful women who chose me, who wanted me, who wanted to make sure that I turned out to be my very best no matter what it took of them, what it cost them. They were going to make damn sure that I didn't fail, that I was going to find something that I was good at and I was going to be a success story because they loved me and they cared about me. That was the trade-off. I didn't have a super strong relationship with my mom either. It was my grandmothers who led the charge for me, who stepped up when I needed them to, without asking. I can't tell you the amount of sacrifices they made for me, and I love them so much for that, because I get a chance now to be a father and love my child all of the ways that I wasn't. To be there and be present for my daughter. I've waited my entire life for this moment, and I cherish every single second of every single day because it's the greatest blessing in the entire world. And she'll never have to go without me. Never have to wonder why or feel like she wasn't enough for me to make it work, or feel like she's not enough to doubt herself or to lose her place in the world because she doesn't have her dad around. See, that's the message that I really want anybody who hears this story to understand. Is your presence is the real present to your kids. To look over at the sideline during a game and see your face there, right? To hear you cheer them on at graduation or a little moment. To be there one night when they come home and have their heart broken and need to talk, or they're confused, or they're sad, or they're angry, or something. And you're just there with a hug and love to tell them it's going to be okay. That's the most important thing a child could ever experience in their life. Ever. You can see on my 25th birthday, when I was living with my mom in Colorado and living with my brother, with my family, trying to figure it all out, my dad went to jail. And he called me, and I remember him telling me, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And you know, all I could do is love him even more and forgive him. Because it was all I had left. I'd realized that the choices that my dad made were not my choices. And so the consequences were not my consequences. It wasn't my fault that my dad wasn't around. But it was my responsibility to keep going and keep fighting for myself and make something of myself in spite of all of that. Because it wasn't that he loved me, it's that he couldn't give me what I needed in the moment. I needed to give that to myself. And man, as a young child, even as a 25-year-old, what? That is so hard when you've never had it. So you're not alone. If anybody out there has experienced something similar, man, I just tell you, you are not alone. Because one thing my dad did do for me is he cheered me on. He told me, if you can get out of that small town in North Dakota, you can be anything you want to be. You can be a superstar. If you just believe, you just gotta jump. You just gotta try. And because of that, I moved back to North Dakota when I was 26. He was still in jail, but he was rehabbing. He's figuring it out, or trying. For the first, I want to say for, not the first time, but for the first time in my life where I could see, where I could hear it in his voice, I could talk to him that he wanted to be better. He wanted more. He was realizing all of the things that he was missing out on. All the things he'd already missed out on. And he didn't want to miss out on that anymore. And so I did. Once I got that belief, once I had him telling me, I had him in my ear, yes, you can, go do it, just go do it. I gave all of my stuff away. Gave it away. I was getting ready to go to LA, and I had a storage unit full of stuff. And I had people just come take it. Found families in need and just gave it to them. Drove to Los Angeles. Drove to Huntington Beach and slept on the beach in the back of my car. And then turned that into one of the 3 numbers I had in my phone. When I left, I had 3 numbers in my phone. Slept on the beach the first night, turned one of those numbers into a couch. Slept on that couch for 2 weeks. Found a place to live after that. 2 more weeks after that, I was acting, doing background work on TV. And the first day that I walked on set on a professional studio, CBS, CSI Cyber, I met Emmett Smith. What? And they put me right on camera. They put me on TV. The first time I was ever on a professional set, I made it on television. National television. Because my dad was right. I could be a superstar if I wanted to, if I chose it, if I just jumped. And then I'm riding high. I'm getting on sets left and right. I'm working. My dad's talking to me. He's telling me, oh, dude, it's coming. It's coming. I'm getting clean. I'm going to get out of here. And I'm going to come to California. And we're going to do this thing. We're going to make this happen. I know we've been talking about it for a long time, but we're going to get a place. And we're going to get to be together. Spend some time. Have a relationship. Build that relationship. And 6 months later, I got a phone call. And it was from my grandmother. And she asked if I was driving. And I said no, I had just finished up a day of work. I was down in the ghetto in Gardena, locking up the yard, putting all the stuff back. And she looked at me and she said, your father is dead. I'm so sorry. I remember didn't look at me. She said to me, I will never forget what the sunset looked like that day. I remember the oranges and the pinks and the purples. It was like the most beautiful sunset I had seen yet since I'd been in LA. And just like that, he was gone. And in the wake of that, I was left with all of these questions and all of this hurt and all of this confusion and not knowing what to do with any of it. Feeling guilty, feeling angry, feeling responsible, right? Because, I developed that savior complex because I just wanted my dad around and I would do anything to get it back, to have him here with me.